Hello, welcome to the General Development webinar. This will examine those general development policies that are set out in the draft island plan. Before we consider the detail of the general development section of the plan, it's worth having a look at the strategic policies that have got particular relevance to this section. And it's probably fair to say that because of the nature of the general development section of the plan, all of the relevant, all of the strategic policies have some relevance to the general development policies. But perhaps ones to highlight are those related to placemaking, which focuses on the livability of the built environment. That's got a particular resonance to the general development section of the plan. So worth a look at that strategic policy, if no others, in terms of its relevance to the general development policies. We've divided the general development policies up into two as a way of dealing with this presentation today. So there are 10 policies in all in this section, and we'll deal with them 5 at a time. The first of these really consider issues of process and impact. So first of all, moving to GD1, those of you who are familiar with the current island plan will recognise the structure and form of this policy. It's similar to in many respects to the current policy in the island plan, in terms of it's essentially seeking to deal with the impact of development on amenity and neighbouring uses of land, and so the policy seeks to provide a revised and updated policy framework in respect of testing those impacts. GD1 in the current plan is longer than GD1 in the proposed island plan, in that the draft plan removes some elements of the current GD1 and deals with them in other thematic sections. So, for example, some of the issues around travel and transport and considering the highway implications of development are dealt with in a specific policy in the draft plan, as opposed to being dealt with in GD1. So that's a key shift in terms of the draft plan relative to the current plan. And as with the current plan, it's proposed that the new GD1 policy would be supported by a range of supplementary planning guidance to deal with issues of tests around impact. GD2, moving on, is a new policy in the draft plan. This is a policy that seeks to require community participation in advance of the submission of planning applications. And this is focused on a particular threshold for development. So it's proposed in the plan that there would be a requirement for a community participation statement to be submitted with an application, where that application is for residential development of 10 or more homes, or for non-residential development where it's over 400 square metres in floor space. And the community participation statement would need to set out how that community participation has been undertaken, who with, and where it was undertaken and what form it took, and significantly how the feedback from the community participation has been taken into account in the development of the proposals that are the subject of a planning application. We would look to bring forward some guidance to help applicants and developers meet this particular policy requirement. The third policy in the GD section relates to developer contributions and obligations, and again a similar content and structure to the current policy regime set out in the current island plan, essentially providing a policy framework for the use of planning obligation agreements, and setting out what the purpose of planning obligation agreements is, and setting the criteria about where they might be used and their specific purposes. Again, we would look to revise supplementary planning guidance to support the use of planning obligation agreements following the approval of the draft plan. In terms of GD4, this deals with enabling or linked development. This is a more comprehensive policy than the existing enabling and linked development policy in the current island plan. At the moment, it has a very narrow focus in the current plan, but that's proposed to be broadened out in the draft island plan. And it's really been reframed to enable a wider consideration and a wider use of enabling and linked development. And that's really around seeking to ensure that where a development requires some form of supporting or enabling works to enable the principal development to happen, then this policy framework can support that proposals of that nature. An example of that might be where if we take the Our Hospital proposal, for example, in order for that to be delivered, there will need to be some other works associated with it. So this isn't something that we envisage being used in a large number of occasions, but the policy framework is there to enable it to be applied when required. And lastly, in this first section, in the general development section of the plan, there's a policy relating to the demolition and replacement of buildings. This is similar to an earlier proposal that was included in the initial draft of the 2011 Island Plan. This policy has been reintroduced based around the plan's response to climate change and the need to reduce carbon emissions. And essentially, this policy promotes the reuse of existing buildings to minimise waste and to make the best use of embodied carbon. And essentially, the policy requires a demonstration that a building, if it is proposed to be demolished, is appropriate to demolish, and the policy would require a demonstration that the building is not appropriate to repair. And there are some tests that are set out in the policy by which any proposals for demolition in whole or in part of a building would need to be tested against to ensure that the proposal was in fact an overall sustainable proposal. Again, we would look to bring forward some supplementary planning guidance to assist with the tests that might be used to demonstrate overall sustainability of proposals and to assist applicants in putting together sustainability statements to support any proposals where demolition is envisaged.
I will pause at that point. I can see Mike's got a question. So perhaps if we can kick off with your question, Mike.
Yeah, hi, Kevin. Thank you for that. I was interested in the GD2 community engagement policy, and given that it's almost universally going to be unpalatable to developers, I'm concerned that the policy needs to be extremely strong. You've mentioned an SPG. Obviously, they take time to come into the mainstream. In the meantime, we've got some enormous capital projects happening, and left to their own devices, I think these community engagement exercises can become pretty murky, and there's some quite sort of capable consultants that run fairly fairly tokenistic exercises, and I think we're already seeing significant deviations from existing SPGs on consultation with what's actually happening on the ground. I really think this policy needs to be strengthened.
Okay, well, interesting comments, and clearly the purpose of the exercise is to get people's comments on the substance and the direction of policy. So happy to receive a comment from you in relation to that. I think what I would say is, clearly some developers are doing that to some extent already. I know Andium Homes do some of that work at the moment, and I think some of the perhaps some of the larger developers on the island have also undertaken those sorts of exercises previously. But yeah, I accept the point that some guidance about levels of expectation and what we would deem as passing muster, as it were, would be helpful to support your clients and you in that process. So yeah, take note of that.
Would you mind me asking, sorry, I won't take too much longer, but as these sessions are being recorded, do these comments actually become representations, or do we need to make them again separately?
Yeah, we can, in terms of them being formally lodged as comments, we would ask that you submit them in writing to us, please. So, please use the portal, and if your comments in relation to GD2, just tick the box on the list of policies and submit your comment.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, that's a good point. For any comment or concern to be considered through the process, we need to formally receive that as a written comment. Any questions on those? Any other questions on those first 5 policies? No, can't see any hands. So I'll dive into the second section. As I say, this area we've focused on issues related to design, and then we pick up the percent per art policy. So yeah, as you can see, talking about design quality, tall buildings, green backdrop zone, skyline views and vistas, and percent for art. Okay, so first policy is around design quality. Again, the substance of this policy, many of you will be familiar with from the current island plan. It has had some revision, and there is a greater emphasis in this plan around placemaking and contribution of development to that. This policy seeks to support that, talks about principles of good design, which have been set out in existing supplementary planning guidance through the Jersey Design Guide, which I know some of you on the AJA will have been involved in producing. So it does what it says on the tin, and there's some key policy considerations set out in the policy itself that would need to be addressed when this policy is applied. In terms of how this policy is considered and operated through the planning system, we would expect applications to be supported by design statements, and those design statements should set out how our proposal has addressed issues of design, picking up on the various criteria that are set out in the policy. Again, we will be issuing some new guidance about design statements, dealing with these issues, and also picking up some of the considerations that some of the previous policies may also have raised. So clearly things like demolition, the tests on comparing the sustainability of existing buildings relative to new buildings. Again, we would look to provide some guidance to help ensure that there's a framework within which those issues can be properly considered. So you've got some expectation about what's required to be submitted, and our colleagues in development control have some expectation of what ought to be coming in and what information ought to be being provided. So that's the design quality policy. Then move on to tall buildings. We currently have a tall buildings policy within the current island plan, but this has been revised. in the draft plan. I suppose a number of elements to talk about in relation to this. So first of all, what is the definition of a tall building? Well, the plan seeks to define that as something that's 2 or more stories above the prevailing contextual height. So this isn't necessarily just about the relationship of a building to the one next to it. It's about its wider context. And then there's also a definitive measurement, so anything that's over 18 meters in height, which might range between 4 to 6 stories, depending on what type of structure it is. So that's the threshold. What does that do if that's triggered? Well, what that would do if that was triggered is simply require any proposal to be considered against this this policy regime. And what the policy seeks to do is to identify those criteria against which a proposal for a tall building will be assessed. And you can see that they are set out on the slide, and there's additional detail provided around some of those considerations in the preamble to the policy. The other issue that the policy seeks to introduce is a reference to some supporting guidance. So you can see there where applications are received in town, they will be considered relative to some supplementary planning guidance. And the policy itself, on the face of the policy, there's some consideration about, it's not an absolute limit, but there's a ceiling, no pun intended, of 8 stories, where anything over 8 stories in town would require some form of exceptional justification. And the policy seeks to provide a framework such that anything over 8 stories outside of town is not likely to be supported. This policy has been informed by some of the work that's been undertaken to revise the St Helier urban character appraisal. Some of you may be familiar with the current urban character appraisal. That's been reviewed and refreshed. That was undertaken in 2005. Character areas are largely same. There's been some revision to the boundaries of the character areas, but we've still got those 10 character areas across the town, and that work has undertaken to examine the capacity and potential for different parts of the town to accommodate different forms of development, and that's looked at considerations of height. So as set out in the plan, there's an indication of the scale of development that is considered that might be acceptable and might be able to be accommodated in the different parts of the town. So you can see there's a link there between the policy framework and the guidance that's provided. That's the tall buildings policy. I'll then move on to the green backdrop zone. Again, the green backdrop zone is a feature of the current plan, and it relates to those areas of the urban area. So this is a built-up area policy, but it relates to those parts of the built-up area that form the landscape escarpment that provides the backdrop to many of the urban parts of the island. So there's a section out in Goree. The bowl of St Helier obviously has the escarpment wrapping around it, and that's continued along into St Albans Bay to some extent, and then into St Brelade's Bay itself. Again, this work to revise the policy regime here has been informed by the Willie Miller Urban Design Character Appraisal for Town, but also some work that's been undertaken specifically in relation to St Brelade's and focusing in particular on St Brelade's Bay. So that's the spatial application of this policy. In terms of the policy direction, one of the key objectives of this policy is to protect as far as possible that green backdrop, and to ensure that the any development that takes place there is appropriate to its context, so that it respects the landscape context of the escarpment, and this policy seeks to ensure that new development, we manage the impact of new development on this on the green backdrop zone. There have been some examples under the current island plan where there's been some visual harm because of the scale, form and extent of development within the green backdrop zone. So this policy tries to, or this review of the policy tries to strengthen it and to provide it with some greater rigour. So the policy is divided in two. So there's some policy tests for new detached buildings in the green backdrop zone, and then there's some considerations around extension or replacement of buildings in the green backdrop zone. But the essence of it is to try and protect that landscape character and minimise any visual harm of new developments either within the zone itself or on the skyline. And talking of skylines, this moves me on to policy GD9, which is again skyline views and vistas is it's a policy that exists in the current plan, but again it's been revised as part of the island plan review, perhaps to provide a more explicit framework within which this policy might now apply, and it's been broadened slightly as well. So it deals with issues of impact on skyline, where development might affect important views and vistas, but also the setting of listed buildings and places, and also some key landmarks. There is a public interest test, and where harm is caused to skyline views and vistas, consideration can be given to the any potential overriding benefit relative to the harm caused. And there's also a definition in the policy and the preamble about what we mean in terms of how development can impact on a view or a vista. As I say, the preamble to the policy gives some more information about when this policy will apply. So we haven't defined in the plan strategic views, but we give in the preamble an indication of where they're likely to occur and where this will become a material consideration. And again, the policy is informed by work that's been done to look at this issue in the integrated landscape and seascape character appraisal work, together with William Miller's work to review the urban character of St Helier. One of the key issues here, I think, is around the particularly the relationship between the island and its marine environment. So this notion of intervisibility and the relationship that many coastal locations have with the marine setting that they form part of, and part of the integrated landscape and seascape character assessment sets out this consideration of coastal units. So whilst what the coastal unit does is seek to recognise that whilst a planning application might land in I don't know, a landscape character area that of the coastal plain, for example, that coastal plain forms much a part of a much wider setting, which is influenced probably by the escarpment and the marine aspect of a site, all of which ought to be considered as part of the assessment of that application. So the materiality of context and impact of development on a wider area is enhanced, I think, by this this broader consideration that's now set out in GD9. The other change that's been made in relation to policy GD9 is it also embraces the shoreline zone policy, which exists as a separate policy within the current plan. The purpose of the shoreline zone policy, again, this is something that applies just in the built-up area of the island. and the purpose of the policy is really to try and protect those open spaces and glimpses that we get of the shoreline zone in the island's built-up area, and this particularly applies along those sections of the coast that have been developed, but where you do get these incidental glimpses of the sea as you travel along, mostly the coast roads in St Brelade's Bay, across St Albans Bay, and then along the southeast coast. So the policy objective remains the same, but it's just been merged into policy GD9. And then lastly, for the GD policies, the percent for art policy. Again, this is a policy that exists in the current plan, but the application of this policy is now being strengthened, and it's proposed that it becomes a requirement for a certain threshold of development. So, in respect of residential development, anything of 5 homes or more, and then non-residential floor space, 200 square meters or more, there would be a requirement to incorporate public art as part of a proposal. For smaller developments, we would seek to encourage provision of public art where that's appropriate. In terms of the level of contribution that will be sought, the policy sets out an objective to secure approximately a percent of construction costs as part of that, as part of the application of that policy. In terms of the tests for the contributions that are forthcoming, they should be appropriate to the context, and they should contribute to the concept of placemaking and also support local identity and relevance. So it's not a bit of fine art shopping, it's really about seeking to ensure that the incorporation of art, some artistic element into the design process adds value both to the development itself and also to its context. And again, we'll look to revise the supplementary planning guidance to support this the application of this policy. So that brings us to the end of the GD section, and can open the floor to questions. I can see Mike has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry to do that again.
That's all right.
Thanks, Kevin. In the first section, we talked about GD2 and community engagement. And then in the second section, we've been talking about tall buildings. And on pages 91 to 92, the 2021 urban character appraisal, which is based on the 2005 version. But neither of these have been properly publicly consulted upon. And I think that's actually fairly undemocratic and disingenuous for some of these exercises to be kind of quasi-embedded in the island plan that haven't gone through a proper public consultation process, yet are actually quite clearly going to be influential on the future of the built environment.
Yeah, well, I think the urban character appraisal work itself had some stakeholder engagement as part of that particular work stream. So there was public engagement as part of that, including both sort of workshops and just engaging with people on the street in relation to issues around St Heliers built environment. And of course, we find ourselves at the moment in the middle of a consultation event. So none of these things are fixed in tablets of stone. And
yeah, but slipping it in on the basis of some exercises in public into the umbrella of the draft island plan. My point is really, I believe that document should have been circulated as a draft in exactly the same way as the island plan was, so there could be proper consultation in public, not just a series of road shows and then boom, it's an SPG and it's in under the radar in the draft island plan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I hear what you say. I mean, I think I'd take the view that, as I say, nothing's agreed, nothing's adopted yet. Clearly, the work that's done to inform the evidence base for the plan is simply that, it's an evidence base. The Minister will take a view as to whether he's going to adopt all, part, or none of the recommendations coming out of the evidence base, and that will then be incorporated into the draft plan. And then the draft plan itself goes through a period of pretty extensive public engagement, independent review and scrutiny, and then elected member consideration before it's adopted. So there's a way to go in terms of opportunity for change between now and the plan and its policy coming into effect.
So why wasn't it highlighted in the draft island plan that particular document was hadn't gone through a proper consultation process, and it was intentional or implicit in its inclusion that it would be scrutinised in the same degree as the island plan? It just feels to me like it's kind of gone in under the radar.
Well, like I say, I think all of the work streams, all of the evidence bases have had some degree of engagement in terms of their preparation, in order that they can, the parties under preparing that work can have a firm basis on which to provide their advice and recommendations to the Minister. So the Minister will then reflect on that and put that out in the draft plan. And as I say, the substance of the draft plan is there for people to make comment upon.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any more questions on the substance of that? I can see there's some exchanges going on in the chat. I don't know if you want to add anything, either in relation to the presentation, Natasha, or talk about any of the issues emerging from the chat.
I don't think so. I think we've had some good questions from John Baker. I think it's more just about navigating the plan. So whilst today has been talking about general development, it is really just a smorgasbord of policies that, as Kevin has highlighted, deals with the kind of practical sides of planning, decision making and design. There are actually some really important, more general issues that are applied to many different types of development across the plan. So things like considerations of new biodiversity, that is applied to many different development types. So it is really a general development issue, which is why when you look at the structure of the plan, this is really that all the things that you see in this chapter, this volume, apologies, of the plan is dealing with managing development. That's why it's called the managing development chapter. This is development, general development as a small group of policies, but the whole volume do apply to most development types. So biodiversity, climate change, travel and transport considerations, they all have their own chapters, but they are very heavy chapters that focus and drill in on the issues quite deeply. So I just advise you to read the plan and focus on the matters that interest you, because they will inevitably be covered.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. I can see John has his hand raised. Did you have a question, John?
Yeah, well, just wanted to generalise on the questions I've already asked. I mean, I'm really pleased to the amount of community engagement that has been happening, and that's not only happened, in the island plan, but we've had this now more so with the hospital. We did indeed have it with the previous discussions about future hospital, Gloucester Street. But it is just to remind everybody, it is in the UK. It's not just an obligation; it's a legal requirement. And the Localism Act in the UK gave local authorities much more power and local communities much more power to have a say in the design of their community. And in respect of such things as the Southwest Master Plan, that really is working very well. There are quite a number of people, more so with the greatest respect than involved here today, took a position with somebody else is chatting there. A typical Zoom meeting with SOJDC with the South Plan involves a variety of professionals and community people, and it's really great to see. And I just hope that gets the publicity it deserves to get more people involved. Also, moving on to the second part of my questions about the fact that we've moved out of COVID and everybody's looking for a greener future, and I used the example of the new plans by SOJDC for South Hill, and that is green roofs, biodiversity, biophilic design. I mean, it's a wonderful plan. I don't know what people think about the architecture and the politics of it being luxury apartments, but certainly from a eco point of view, it's also designed to be a very efficient building. And we haven't heard, Natasha's replied to me about those aspects. But I haven't seen too much sort of leaping out from the new sort of short-term plan to lock into that modern, new way of thinking. I mean, I believe you're now going to move on to design and art, and I'm very interested in that as well. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, John. I think the issue about building design and performance is the managing emissions thematic webinar. So please dial into that. As Natasha said, it's we've had to effectively chunk up the plan in sort of hopefully digestible, bite-sized sections to put these webinars together. And as Natasha emphasised, it's we've just done that as a way of dealing with it. But they obviously all have an interrelationship with each other, and indeed any proposal is likely to spark consideration of a number of policies across the plan. So it needs to be considered in the round. In terms of I can't see any further questions. I can see your hand up, John, but I assume that's from last time. I'll just conclude by just talking about how to engage. So, as I said at the outset, we've got a series of themed webinars that will be running throughout the rest of the month and into early June. So please sign up for one of those. The parish sessions have, as I say, started yesterday. We're at St Peter today, St Clement's on the day after, and St Brelard on Saturday this week. You can look at the evidence base online. If you want to book a surgery with one of us, Natasha will be hosting the general development surgery on Friday. I'm available to talk about the historic environment policies on Friday, so we'll send the link round and you can book a slot in our calendars to do that. And as I say, if you've got any formal comment that you wish to make, please visit the portal and submit your comments through that route. Okay, so that concludes the session today. Thanks for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much.